It's a haunting thought. The idea that home isn't a place you can walk away from, but something you carry with you regardless of where you go. We often treat our origins as a backdrop, a setting we can exit when the scene changes. Baldwin challenges this idea. He argues that home is an internal state, a lens that permanently colors how you perceive reality. This is so true for Kendrick Lamar's discography. He consistently centers or recenters his artistry around the pulling gravity of his home city, Compton. The places we live in eventually live within us. They influence how we walk, how we talk, and how we understand the world. Kendrick Lamar embodies this tension. He might physically leave Compton, yet the gravity of home refuses to let him go.
If home is an internal condition, then world building becomes the external expression of that state.
It is the ability to take that internal gravity and project it outward, to rebuild a reality from imagination and memory.
But what happens when that world is built against you? What happens when the very architecture of your life is designed to contain, surveil, and ultimately erase you?
At its core, Good Kid, Mad City is a coming-of-age story. A journey detailing how a young kid known as K-Dot made the life-changing decision to come into his own and become Kendrick Lamar. Throughout the record, Kendrick weaves a narrative that takes us through his experiences and personal conflicts, diving deep into the realities of peer pressure, gang violence, and the desperate desire for spiritual growth. All in just one day.
I would argue that Kendrick Lamar's discography can be seen as a sort of cinematic universe.
Like the Marvel or Star Wars universe. By the time we reach Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, Kendrick is performing an endgame level deconstruction, systematically dismantling the Kung Fu Kenny and Savior personas he meticulously built in previous phases.
What always fascinated me about Kendrick Lamar's storytelling is that he balances both the inside and the outside world throughout his whole discography. His inner struggles are shaped by the world around him, his neighborhood, the political environment, the pressure. But at the same time, his thoughts, decisions, and emotions also shape the outer world in return.
If we look at Kendrick's entire discography, we can analyze his path as an ongoing negotiation between the external and the internal. Section 80 is a sociological bird's-eye view. The album's built around generational themes, especially those affected by Reaganomics. The effects of drug addiction, abortion, and systemic abandonment are presented through archetypes and stories of women and men growing up in a broken system. Kendrick is a narrator and critic, recreating his and his peers' world. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is the polar opposite, a pure internal deconstruction, a therapy session where physical location vanishes. It focuses on trauma, generational pain, and its own contradictions. There is little emphasis on physical location and more on internal landscapes and emotional and moral reckoning. Comparable to the miseducation of Lauryn Hill, the narrative is driven by his thoughts, fears, and confessions, not his environment. Damn explores the contradictions of the soul, pride versus humility, fear versus faith, loyalty versus betrayal. Most tracks center on Kendrick's internal contradictions and the weight of destiny. Yet, he connects them to external stakes, especially race, fame, and violence. Damn is not rooted that much in geography or spaces. It complements Mr. Morale extremely well. GNX is interesting because it is both external and internal, but for different reasons than, let's say, Illmatic by Nas. The external or geographical factors that locate this album more on the external side of the spectrum aren't always explicitly mentioned. As a listener, you recognize this as a distinctly West Coast album, not because Kendrick walks you through Compton street by street, but because of the predominant West Coast production style, the guest features, and the overall atmosphere the album creates. However, you will also find tracks like The Heart Part 6, Gloria, Man at the Garden that focus more on inner struggles, friendship, and values. And then, there are two records that are masterclasses in duality. Good Kid, Mad City and To Pimp a Butterfly are albums where inner conflict and social context are inseparable. They operate in the tension between both sides of the spectrum. To Pimp a Butterfly expands the lens. The block becomes the country, the personal becomes political. It stretches beyond the block into America's racial history, political anxiety, and spiritual crisis, while still keeping us inside Kendrick's most intimate fears, contradictions, and self-reflections. And then there is Good Kid, Mad City. This album is the perfect equilibrium of the spectrum because it grounds the internal conflict in a hyper-specific geography. The internal is Kendrick's innocence, his fear, and his morality. The good kid. The external is the peer pressure, the gang politics, and the specific coordinates of Compton, the Mad City. As I said in a previous video, hip-hop is a collective library of memory and imagination, storing emotions connected to place and time.
Therefore, to unlock the mysteries hidden in this library, we have to treat these songs and albums like maps or guides for exactly these spaces. We have to look at the places that shaped these stories. For Good Kid, Mad City, this means that we have to ask the question, how did Compton become what it is in Good Kid, Mad City?
Prior to World War II, Compton was a small, predominantly white, middle-class suburb and farming village, often described as an ideal home for industrial workers. As black families moved in, white residents met them with cross burnings and vandalism. When the intimidations failed, the white residents and the money left. This is what is known as white flight. By 1970, the city had flipped to 70% black, but capital and investment had vanished. By the time Kendrick is born in '87, the architecture of the city had been weaponized. As urban theorist Mike Davis points out in City of Quartz, the post-war planning of LA divided the landscape into what he calls corridors of containment, designed to ensure the physical isolation of the underclass. What happened in LA was not an isolated incident. The 1956 Federal Aid Highway Act was frequently used as a tool for what was called slum clearance. These interstate projects across America were strategically used to demolish vibrant Black and Latino business districts, effectively weaponizing freeways to segment cities and protect white suburban wealth from the encroachment of people of color.
Growing up on the sounds of Dr. Dre, MC8, DJ Quick, I was always captivated by the city of Compton. However, when I was 10, 11 years old, I did not know about this history. So I was unaware that I was participating in the commodification of a space engineered for social isolation. We were consumers of a spectacle, treating the physical and systemic barricades of Compton as an aesthetic vibe.
When you look at the actual geography of Compton, it reveals a structured and almost mathematical reality. The city is literally structured like a grid with these long and wide streets. It is this grid-like structure that makes it easy for police to surveil the city with what I've learned from Ice Cube is called a ghetto bird. In fact, in 1966, the LAPD launched the so-called Project Skyknight, the first permanent police helicopter patrol in the world. The police exploited the fact that the suburban dream of visibility and order could be flipped into a nightmare of hypervisibility. This is the moment Compton's grid becomes what Michel Foucault calls a panopticon. In Foucault's analysis of power, the panopticon is a cruel, ingenious cage. It consists of a central tower surrounded by a ring of cells, each backlit, so that the inmate is always visible to the tower, but the tower is invisible to the inmate. Because the prisoner never knows exactly when they are being watched, they must behave as if they are being watched at all times. In a panopticon, the observer is separated from the observed. The helicopter pilot is a disembodied voice or a spotlight. They are not a human neighbor. This creates a monstrous form of power that is felt everywhere but can be confronted nowhere.
Foucault argues that the efficiency of the panopticon is that it makes the actual exercise of power unnecessary. Eventually, you don't even need the helicopter to be in the air. The possibility of its presence is enough to dictate how a good kid walks, talks, and hides.
In Compton, the LAPD replaced the physical tower with the sky. By utilizing Project Skynight, the state created a panopticon without walls. The helicopter became the omnipresent eye. Foucault argues that the goal of this architecture is to induce a state of conscious and permanent visibility that assures the automatic functioning of power. On Good Kid, Mad City, the Mad City is a psychological trap built on this very principle. The same feeling of being surveilled is perceivable the very moment you press play on Good Kid, Mad City. For a brief moment, you hear this distortion or delay before the prayer begins. This is the effect of a physical tape being played on an old cassette deck or player. Cassette decks rely on rubber belts to transfer power from the motor to the heavy metal flywheels that drive the tape. Over decades, this rubber loses elasticity and stretches. This is what produces this delay effect. Someone has pressed play on a cassette. The original album cover is a redacted Polaroid photo. Both the sound and the cover seem to be collected evidence by the state. The redacted Polaroid and the mechanical click of the tape deck suggest that we are looking at a police case file. He's taking the very tools the state uses to criminalize the good kid and using them to document his own humanity.
The sense of always being watched can be felt throughout the whole album, especially in songs like Mad City or The Art of Peer Pressure. The grid-like structure of the city is presented as a series of one-way streets and dead ends. The streets feel like a labyrinth made of concrete. There's a feeling of not being able to escape this condition.
In the labyrinth made of concrete, only limited movement is possible. There's only left or right. The predictability is exactly what allowed the LAPD's Ghetto Bird to maintain total surveillance.
They made a right, they made a left, they made a right, then another right. One lucky night with the homies.
This constant observation does something to the mind. Eventually, power isn't just something that happens to you. It is something that you begin to exercise on yourself.
The city of Compton is color-coded. The same colors that define territorial gang lines are mirrored by the red and blue of the police lights. Both the state and the streets leave no neutral physical space for a good kid.
What am I supposed to do when the topic is red or blue and you understand that I ain't, but know I'm accustomed to it? But what am I supposed to do when the blinking of red and blue flash from the top of your roof and your dog has the same roof?
Kendrick is highlighting a terrifying symmetry here. In US-centered narratives, the red and blue of the police represent the solution to the red and blue of the gangs. But in Mad City, they are both on a unified spectrum of surveillance.
This surveillance is being extended even to the private space. The porch is not a transition to safety. It is a site of lethal exposure. In the closing moments of Shireen, Kendrick provides a hyper-specific and precise, almost mathematical mapping of this domestic vulnerability.
I'm 2 blocks away, 250 feet and 6 steps from where she stays. She waved at me across the street. I pulled up, a smile on my face, and then I see two black hoodies. I froze as my phone rang.
Shireen's home offers no sanctuary because the corridors of containment extend all the way to the front door. The appearance of the 2 black hoodies at the same time of his arrival suggests that the front porch or the domestic space is being watched with the same intensity as the Ghetto Bird watches the rest of the city.
The world building of Good Kid, Mad City is rooted in a historical project of exclusion. In the 1930s, the federal government established the Homeowners Loan Corporation to stabilize the housing market. But they did so by weaponizing geography. They created maps of every major American city, grading neighborhoods from A, green, to D, red, to dictate where capital was safe to flow. A neighborhood was marked red not because of the quality of its architecture or a lack of existing infrastructure. The D grade was triggered officially by so-called demographic infiltration. This was state-sanctioned euphemism, meaning that the presence of even a single black family or foreign-born residents like Jewish, Italian, or Mexican immigrants rendered the area a financial hazard. This red line effectively trapped black families in deteriorating zones while the government subsidized white flight to the suburbs. This collapse of property values did more than create poor neighborhoods. It strategically removed the financial tools required for social mobility. By denying mortgages and repair loans, the state ensured that the financial bedrock of the American middle class was permanently dismantled for the residents of Compton. A number of different strategies were applied by real estate firms, like blockbusting. It was a practice in which real estate agents and building developers convinced residents in a particular area to sell their property at below market prices. This was achieved by fear-mongering the homeowners, telling them that racial minorities would soon be moving into the neighborhoods.
While researching these mechanisms of inequality, the topic of redlining comes up again and again as a haunting theme. From Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow to William Julius Wilson and Loic Wacan's social frameworks, they all identify the practice of redlining as the original sin of American urbanism, the catalyst for the poverty to prison pipeline.
Wacar, for example, argues in his writing that the state uses the ghetto and the prison as a single functional system of containment. Redlining creates the poverty creates the illegal activity justifies the expansion of the police state. The prison system then does not provide enough rehabilitation and integration into the workforce, therefore the cycle of poverty to prison never really ends. In Money Trees, the capitalist dream is the psychological fuel for exactly this cycle. Because the legitimate pathways to wealth were erased by the HOLC maps, K-Dot and J-Rock pursue this dream through the only market left open to them. J-Rock's verse serves as a brutal report from within this reality, describing the rational logic of survival when the dream must be achieved at any cost.
Bacon soda, y'all are whipping. Ain't no turkey on Thanksgiving. My homeboy just don't. I just hope the Lord forgive him. Pots with cocaine residue. Every day I'm hustling. What else is a thug to do when you eat cheese from the government? Gotta provide for my daughter and them. Get the fuck up out my way. Got that drum and I got them bands just like a parade.
If we stop there, we treat Compton as a passive victim of geography and politics, and that is not the world Kendrick built. While the system was slowly choking the city, at the same time, the black community began an act of cultural re-engineering. Rather than simply enduring the label of a redline zone, the community seized the geography, transforming it into a sovereign, political, and creative community. Since the beginning of redlining in Compton, Black people started to resist and to work to challenge the government's decisions in these maps. The NAACP and affluent Black families begin legal work against these restricted areas.
In the 1960s, a number of Black politicians gained important political seats all over the country. However, this Black political leadership was hollowed out by economic abandonment, leaving a generation, the children of the 60s, with political power but no economic future. In 1969, Douglas Dollarhide became the mayor of Compton and the first Black mayor of a metropolitan city in California. 4 years later, in 1973, Doris Davis then became the first Black woman mayor in the United States. Compton became a Black city in the political imagination, a place where the apparatus of the state was, for a moment, reimagined in the image of its own people.
When a city is stripped of its financial currency, they don't stop striving for value. they just switch currency.
The Communicative Arts Academy, founded in 1969, was established to use art to rebuild the community, employing assemblage art from the Watts Rights debris, a direct precursor to the sampling aesthetic of hip-hop. More importantly, the people of Compton recoded the city's culture and sounds. From the funk of the 70s to the revolutionary sound of NWA, Compton stopped being a suburb that lost its status and started being a global epicenter of truth-telling. The community took the very condition designed to erase them and turned it into a brand that the whole world had to acknowledge. Consider Serena Williams, a daughter of Compton, crip walking on the manicured grass of Wimbledon. That movement functioned as a tactical transgression, a deliberate insertion of the street into an architecture and culture of exclusion. It mirrors how legends of the game like DJ Quick, Dr. Dre, NWA, or MC8 basically kicked the door in. They didn't seek permission to enter the mainstream. They proved that when a community reauthored its own story, Compton ceases to be a mere geographic casualty of redlining and systemic racism and becomes a dominant cultural frequency that the rest of the world is forced to tune into.
This is the tension of Good Kid, Mad City. The crushing weight of the external infrastructure, the system, the streets, redlining, against the power of the internal culture, morals, resistance, pressure. So let's find out how this plays out on the album. As I dug deeper into the engineered landscape of Compton, I realized that the struggle for liberation is always, first and foremost, a struggle for space. If the city is designed to break you, then the very act of world building becomes a form of subversion. It is a way of saying, you built this cage, but you cannot dictate how I live within it.
We often think of spaces as empty containers that simply exist, but in reality, spaces are produced. They are manufactured by policy, maintained by power, and challenged by those who inhabit them.
To truly understand how space works in Good Kid, Mad City, we have to move beyond the literal streets and look through the lenses of two groundbreaking theorists, Edward Soja and Homi Bhabha.
Edward Soja was a geographer and urban theorist interested in spatial justice. He analyzed how power, resources, and rights are distributed across space and how these spatial arrangements reflect, reproduce, or challenge structural inequalities.
Soja established a theory of what he calls third spaces. He basically analyzes three different types of urban spaces: first, second, and third space.
Think of the first space as the physical world, the literal streets of Compton with its institutions and buildings. Second space is the conceived world, the realm of ideas, ideologies, and mental maps. This includes how city planners envisioned you to use the city.
The third space is then where the first two spaces collide. It's the lived social reality that doesn't fit neatly into either box. It's the in-between.
Think of it like a public park. The first space is the grass, the benches, and the streets to walk on. The physically constructed world. The second space is the city planner's map showing where people are supposed to walk, sit, or play. But the third space is the group of kids using those benches as skate ramps or a community protest happening on the lawn. It's where human action completely changes the meaning of the physical environment. It's what we make out of these spaces.
In Good Kid, Mad City, the white Toyota is a really important world-building tool. Using Edward Soja's theory of space, we can see this car as a third space, a mobile sanctuary that creates its own rules.
K-Dot and his homies are in the white Toyota and move through Compton's first spaces. Through the lens of the Ghetto Bird helicopters, the car exists in a state of high probability. It is a vessel that the state monitors but doesn't always intervene in. This creates a tense environment where the homies are constantly calculating the visibility, trying to stay beneath the radar of the official map.
But inside the car, they create a third space. A place of critical exchange, where they freestyle, plot, and dream of money trees. It's an intellectual process of dismantling the second space. They're using this vehicle to expand their geographical imagination. Even as they are driving through redlined Compton, They are mentally outside of it. The car becomes a mobile, sovereign territory. But it is only sovereign because this is the only place where the good kid can decide which mask to wear. Outside the car, the state imposes this label.
Smoking on the finest dope. Aye. Drink until I can't no more. Aye. Really, I'm a sober soul. But I'm with the homies right now. And we asking for no favors. Rushing quick to laugh about it later. Aye. Really, I'm a peacemaker. But I'm with the homies right now. And mama used to say, one day it's gonna
While Soja provides the structural blueprint of the city, Homi Bhabha allows us to zoom in on the psychological cost of navigating that blueprint.
Bhabha, a foundational figure in post-colonial theory, argues that the third space is less about a coordinate on a map and more about a disruptive state of being. It is the in-between zone where a marginalized individual is forced to negotiate their identity in real time.
For the good kids in a mad city, this is a tactical necessity. When a system already defines you as a threat, your identity becomes a fluid masquerade. You are constantly reshaping who you are based on the immediate pressure of your environment. A process Bhabha breaks down into two specific survival mechanisms.
First is mimicry. This is the act of adopting the master's language or behavior, but doing it almost the same, but not quite. It is a form of mockery that hides in plain sight. You perform the script the system expects, but you warp it just enough to keep your own spirit alive. Second, hybridity. This is the new era of negotiation that emerges when different cultural worlds crash into each other. It's where the good kid and the mad city merge to create something entirely new, a persona that is neither fully one nor the other.
Think of mimicry as a survival mask. The state, or the master, has already written a script for youth in Compton. They are dangerous, violent, and criminal. When K-Dot sits in the white Toyota in Backseat Freestyle, he is performing mimicry. He's adopting the master's language, the obsession with money, power, and sexual dominance, and heightening it to a level of absurdity. Bhabha says mimicry is almost the same, but not quite. Kendrick is playing the character the police expects to see, but he's doing it so loudly and so aggressively that it becomes a subversion. He's using the master stereotypes to hide his good kid interior. This allows him to move through this world without being labeled soft or vulnerable.
They aren't becoming criminals, they are performing criminality to survive a world that has already decided they are guilty. When Kendrick and the homies engage in illegal activities or adopt hyper-aggressive personas, they are often mimicking the very role the system designed for them. Bhabha would argue that by acting out the stereotype, they are performing a script that they didn't write.
In Bhabha's view, third space is less about where you are. It's more about who you are forced to pretend to be.
In the previous sections, we saw how the 1956 Highway Act and redlining physically partitioned Compton. But in Sing About Me, we see the biological and social cost of that isolation. The world begins to fade away.
The physical world is described by the protagonist as a fatherless, institutionalized void.
This orphanage we call a ghetto was quite a routine. And last night was just another distraction or a reaction of what we consider madness. I know exactly what happened.
To describe the ghetto as an orphanage is to acknowledge the success of what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow. Alexander analyzes a two-stage process of isolation. First, redlining and disinvestment stripped the community of its economic foundation, creating a vacuum of opportunity. Second, the war on drugs filled that vacuum with a carceral net. The war on drugs refers to a massive expansion of federal, state, and local law enforcement efforts aimed at curbing illegal drug use and trade. While President Richard Nixon first coined the term in 1971, the modern era of mass incarceration was solidified by the Reagan administration in 1982. Alexander points to a critical historical inconsistency. When Reagan officially declared the war in 1982, drug use and drug crime were actually on the decline. At the time of the declaration, less than 2% of the American public viewed drugs as the nation's most important issue. Illegal drug use had peaked in the late 1970s and was trending downward when the administration pivoted toward a punitive, militarized approach. The crack epidemic, often cited as the justification for the war, did not reach a fever pitch in the media until 1985 or 1986. Years after the war had been declared and funded. The withdrawal of capital transformed the neighborhood into a segmented zone, where survival was decoupled from the traditional labor market. Mass incarceration served as the mechanism to physically extract the protective layer of the community, the fathers and older brothers, turning a geographic area into a site of collective abandonment. When the state removes the father, it replaces him with the parole officer, the police siren, and the ghetto bird. The condition Baldwin spoke of becomes an inheritance of surveillance. When Kendrick's peer says the ghetto is a routine, he is describing the standardized processing of black bodies through this system. The madness is the predictable reaction of a community that has been systemically stripped of its protective layers, leaving the good kid to be raised by a landscape of a weaponized grid and police surveillance.
Just promise me you tell this story when you make it big. And if I die before your album drops.
By demanding to be sung about, the protagonist is fighting against becoming a silent statistic in the new Jim Crow system. So what Kendrick is doing here is establishing an archive of the invisible.
In a redlined city, there are no monuments to the people who die in these parks or on the street corners. They are meant to fade away into a statistic. He is demanding that his hybrid identity be recorded. The verse ends with gunshots mid-sentence. This is the ultimate erasure. The state's system of control, the new Jim Crow, has successfully processed another body.
The second verse introduces a woman who occupies the first spaces we have already discussed, the parking lots and the parks.
And I'ma need that $40 even if I gotta hand the parking lot Gonzalez Park on fire by a married man and father of three.
Her world is Gonzalez Park, a specific geographic coordinate in Compton. In the redlined world, public parks, which should be green infrastructure, are repurposed as a site of predatory commerce. She claims she will never fade away, but as her voice literally vanishes at the end of the verse, we see the physical manifestation of erasure.
Probably live longer than you and never fade away. I'll never fade away. I'll never fade away. I know my fate and I'm on the ground for this cake. I'ma get it or die trying. I'm eyeing every male gender with intentions of buying. You lying. Cause talking about you can help them with my story. You can help me if you sell.
In Soja's second place, Gonzalez Park was designed as a site for communal health and leisure. However, through the lens of Michelle Alexander, we see that in a redlined district, the park is repurposed into a predatory market. In a neighborhood where traditional jobs have been extracted via disinvestment, the body becomes just another asset.
Keisha's sister represents the invisible population of the new Jim Crow. Alexander argues that once a person is labeled whether as a criminal, a thug, or in this case a sex worker, they enter a shadow realm where they are no longer entitled to the basic protections of the law. Effectively, Gonzalez Park turns into a processing zone. In the third verse of Sing About Me, the narrative lens shifts from the witnessed to the witness. The first two verses represent the voices the system has successfully silenced, the erased bodies of the new Jim Crow. Kendrick then talks about the structural nature of exactly this system.
Cursing the life of 20 generations at the hearse soul. Exactly what'd happen if I ain't continue rapping or steady being distracted by money, drugs, and 4-5s. I count lives all on these songs.
The 20 generations line aligns perfectly with Michelle Alexander's argument that mass incarceration functions as a caste system, not just a legal one. When the state extracts the protective layer of a community, the curse, poverty, trauma, the lack of equity, becomes a trait inherited from one generation to the other.
I wrote some raps that made sure that my lifeline reeking the scent of a reaper. I count lives all on these songs. Look at the weak and cry. Pray one day you be strong.
By counting lives, Kendrick is performing the archival resistance I've already mentioned before. In a system where Black Death is routine and a statistic. Counting the lives, naming them, singing about them, is a radical act of humanization.
This leads directly into the Dying of Thirst section of the track. If the first half of the song is the sociological report, the external reality of the new Jim Crow, the second half is the spiritual solution.
Tired of running, tired of hunting, my own kind, but retiring nothing,
Kendrick begins this verse by describing the physical and psychological exhaustion of the vacance cycle. This is the madness of the red-lined district. When the new Jim Crow extracts fathers and economic opportunity, it leaves behind a vacuum where hunting my own kind becomes a survival mandate. One of the most devastating lines in the track addresses the intergenerational caste Alexander describes.
It's no discussion, hereditary, all of my cousins, dying of thirst, dying of thirst.
Kendrick is arguing that thirst, the desire for survival, is not a choice but an inheritance. This aligns with the system of the racial caste Alexander describes. Once the state has successfully labeled a person hazardous or criminal, that label and the thirst it produces is passed down like DNA.
You dying of thirst, you dying of thirst, so hop in that water and pray that it works.
The skit featuring the elderly woman represents what sociologists call the invisible institution, the black church's historic role as a space of survival within a hostile state. By having the homies repeat her words, she's reprogramming their internal architecture.
Why are you so angry? See, you young men are dying of thirst. Do you know what that means? That means you need water, holy water. You need to be baptized with the Spirit of the Lord. Do you want to receive God as your personal Savior? Okay, repeat after me.
This leads us to Compton, featuring West Coast legend Dr. Dre.
Compton, Compton, ain't no city quite like mine.
Sonically, the world has changed. The claustrophobic hiss of the cassette tape is replaced by a white orchestral anthem. Kendrick calls himself a product of the pipeline, acknowledging the new Jim Crow system that tried to process him. By rising as a king, he flips the systemic script on its head. We started this journey with Jane Baldwin's truth, that home is an irrevocable condition. If that condition is a verdict the state has passed on your life, then world building is the action you take against that judgment. Throughout Good Kid, Mad City, we have deconstructed a landscape where redlining, the vacance cycle, and the new Jim Crow function as a combined system of containment. But Kendrick takes the very audio and visual evidence intended to criminalize him, the evidence of his peers, his city, and his sins, and transforms it into a masterpiece of reclamation. World building is often treated as a form of escapism, a way to leave reality behind. For Kendrick, world building is an act of reclaiming justice. Because when you build your own world, you finally get to decide who survives in it.